at year 1600 when the Renaissance era ended. Next up is the Baroque period, lasting from 1600 to 1750. The Baroque saw an explosion of new musical styles with the introduction of the concerto, the sonata, and the opera. The term Baroque means oddly shaped pearl, and the term was originally used to imply strangeness and extravagance. The Baroque started in Italy and spread to most of Europe. It was a period as well as a style that used exaggerated gestures to produce drama, tension, exuberance, and grandeur in sculpture, painting, literature, dance, and music. During this period, the English settled Jamestown, Galileo confirmed the earth is not round, and Sir Isaac Newton published his laws of universal gravitation. George Washington was born, the infamous Salem witch trials began in 1692, and the French and Indian War occurred at the very end of the Baroque period. Culturally, Europe remained centered around the monarchy and aristocracy. There was a return to Greek and Roman ideals, and it was known as Europe's Gilded Age. The loosening of the church's political control of Europe meant that the non-religious music could flourish, in particular, instrumental music. Patronage remained the primary way artists earned a living. The musical needs of these political and religious institutions dictated much of the music the composer produced. One instrument that was key to the development of the Baroque period was the harpsichord. This keyboard instrument has strings that are plucked rather than hit with a hammer and have a very distinct sound. The oldest harpsichords date from the 1500s, and by the beginning of the Baroque were enormously popular. Claudio Monteverdi was a composer who straddled both the Renaissance and Baroque period. He defined a first practice and a second practice. In the first, harmony and counterpoint took precedence over text. As we transitioned into the Baroque and into second practice, the need to express the meaning of the text surpassed any other concern. A belief in music as a tool of communication was an important concept in the Baroque period. While Renaissance music was more formal and conservative, the Baroque became much more complex, highly tonal, and portrayed much more emotion than before. Contrast was an important dramatic element, and composers used loud and soft, solo and ensemble, and different timbres to create this effect. The Baroque period established the concept of melody and harmony, moving away from the modal system and settling into the major-minor system that we use today. As instrumental music rose in popularity, the idea that instruments should be grouped together in a standard way created the first versions of the modern orchestra. There were many musical forms that came to define the Baroque era. In vocal music, opera was a game changer. Opera is a drama that is primarily sung, accompanied by instruments, and presented on stage. The earliest opera still performed today is Monteverdi's Orfeo, which was composed in 1607. The first public opera house opened in Venice in 1637, and the genre was altered to suit the preferences of the audiences. Singers took on a celeb status, and so greater emphasis was placed on the aria as well. In instrumental music, the sonata, concerto, and suite were new forms. Sonata is a term most commonly designated to a work in several movements for one or more instruments, and basso continuo. Basso continuo is a system of partially improvised accompaniment played on a bass line. It provided chordal accompaniment. Sonatas could be classified as sonatas de chiesa, or church sonatas, which usually consisted of 4 movements alternating between slow and fast tempos. The second type of sonata was sonatas de camera, or chamber sonata, which was more a series of dances. Bach and Handel both composed many sonatas, and Bach's solo sonatas for violin and cello remain famous to this day. The concerto took on several forms in the Baroque period and was first used to loosely define a composition for a diverse ensemble of voices and instruments, but evolved to take on its modern definition, a multi-movement work for instrumental soloists, or groups of soloists, and orchestra. The most prolific composer of the solo concerto was Antonio Vivaldi, who wrote approximately 350 of them, and also established the 3-movement form, fast, slow, fast. Violin concertos were the most popular, along with trumpets, cello, oboe, flute, and bassoon concertos. The suite is the last instrumental form and was the first multi-movement work for instrumentalists. This suite is essentially a series of dances in the same key, most or all of them in 2-part form. Dance movements included the allemande, courante, sarabande, minuet, and jig. Composers of this era include the one-hit wonder Johann Pachelbel, canon in G, Henry Purcell, Antonio Vivaldi, George Frederick Handel, George Philipp Telemann, and the one and only Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach is one of the most important figures in all of classical music. This dude was born in 1685 in Germany to a very musical family. His father was a string player, but unfortunately passed away when he was just 10. His older brother, also named Johann, you can imagine that was confusing, was a church organist and gave Bach his first formal keyboard lessons. At just 18, Bach secured a church organist position in Arnstadt, a role that gave him a regular salary and expanded his skills at the keyboard. He held 3 major jobs after this. He worked for a duke, then a prince, then became the musical director at the St. Thomas Church and School in Leipzig. Bach enriched established German styles through his mastery of counterpoint, harmonic, and motivic organization, and his adaptation of rhythms, forms, and textures from abroad. Bach composed over 1,000 pieces of music, including hundreds of cantatas, which is a medium-length piece for voices and instrumental accompaniment, as well as his sacred passions, the Brandenburg concertos, and adaptations of Lutheran hymns. These 4-part adaptations are often what we use as our chorales in for warm-ups in class today. Bach was primarily valued as an organist, and his well-tempered clavier, which is 2 volumes of piano music in every musical key, is a quintessential student text, completed in 1744. Bach's music was characterized by lots of notes, simpler rhythms, and steady shifts of underlying harmony. Beethoven describes Bach as the original father of harmony. His fugues are masterful. The composition of 2 superimposed independent lines, with each line making musical sense by itself, but also combining seamlessly with one another. Bach was married twice and fathered 20 children. Another fun fact about Bach, he once walked 213 miles to hear a performance by an organist whom he admired. Once he had heard the concert, he turned around and walked the same distance home again. 213 miles one way. Makes me appreciate Spotify. Bach died in 1750 in Leipzig, most likely due to a botched eye operation. His death marks the end of the Baroque period. After his death, Bach declined in popularity until 1829, when Mendelssohn performed the St. Matthew Passion and rescued Bach from oblivion. Although the Baroque period ended over 250 years ago, the music is still played today. The spirit of the Baroque, an unwavering belief in the power of music to touch people's lives, changed music history forever. Thanks for tuning into the 3rd installment of Gibson Films. Don't forget to tell your people you love them.